I want to start by acknowledging something that rarely gets spoken about honestly, especially in markets like this, and that is the exhaustion. Not panic, not terror, not the sharp fear that comes with crashes, but the slow, grinding tiredness that comes from waiting, from watching the same price ranges repeat, from seeing optimism rise and fall again and again, from checking charts out of habit rather than hope. If you've been holding XRP for a long time, there's a specific kind of fatigue that sets in. It's quiet, it's heavy, it's not dramatic enough for people to talk about, but it wears you down far more than a sudden drop ever could. Sideways movement, delayed progress, repeated dips that don't fully break but don't resolve either. These are the conditions that drain people emotionally. They make you question your judgment in silence. They make you wonder whether your patience is wisdom or stubbornness. And if you're feeling that, you're not weak, you're not foolish, and you're not alone. This is exactly how long waiting periods are designed to feel. What's important to understand is that most people don't exit markets because they are proven wrong. They exit because they are tired. They leave not at the moment of maximum fear, but at the moment of maximum emotional depletion. It's when the mind says, I just want this to stop taking up space in my head. That moment feels rational, it feels calm, it feels like clarity. But very often, it's simply the nervous system asking for relief. Markets don't need to scare you out, they just need to bore you, frustrate you, and exhaust you long enough that you give up the position quietly, without drama, without a story, without even being fully aware of why you're doing it. This is why it's helpful to reframe what you're experiencing. This isn't a failure of the asset. It's not even necessarily a failure of timing. It's a psychological test, and not the kind that asks whether you can handle volatility, but the kind that asks whether you can handle stillness, whether you can sit with uncertainty without constantly demanding feedback, whether you can tolerate long periods where nothing seems to validate your patience. Most people can't, not because they're unintelligent, but because human psychology is not built for extended ambiguity. We crave movement because movement feels like information. Silence feels like danger, even when it isn't. Let's talk quietly and honestly about the first and most overlooked truth, because everything else builds on this. The real struggle for long-term XRP holders has not been fear. It has been exhaustion. Fear is loud, fear is dramatic, fear comes with sharp price drops and sudden headlines, and when fear shows up, the body knows how to respond. Adrenaline kicks in, attention sharpens, decisions, even rushed ones, feel justified. But exhaustion is different. Exhaustion is slow. It creeps in over months and years of waiting, watching the same ranges repeat, hearing the same arguments cycle, and feeling no emotional resolution. It doesn't feel urgent, it feels heavy. This is the kind of tiredness that doesn't make people panic sell. It makes them quietly question themselves. It makes them stare at a chart without really looking, scroll through updates without absorbing them, and feel a constant low-grade irritation that never fully goes away. Over time, that irritation turns inward. People stop asking, what is the market doing? And start asking, what if I was wrong all along? Not because new information has appeared, but because their mental energy has been depleted. Sideways movement is far more dangerous to conviction than crashes. A crash ends something. It forces a moment. It gives emotional clarity, even if it hurts. Sideways markets offer no such release. They stretch time. They remove feedback. They make patience feel like passivity. This is where most long-term positions are lost, not at the bottom, but in the middle of nothing happening. People don't leave because the thesis is broken. They leave because they are tired of carrying the uncertainty. It's important to say this clearly and without judgment. Feeling this way does not mean you lack discipline. It means you are human. The nervous system is not designed to stay in a state of prolonged uncertainty without cost. Every time you check price, every time you read another opinion, every time you wonder whether today will finally be the day something changes, you spend a little more mental energy. Eventually, the mind looks for relief. And when relief becomes the goal, logic quietly steps aside. This is why so many exits feel calm and rational in the moment. There is no panic, no fear, just a sense of being done waiting, done hoping, done carrying it. That feeling can be mistaken for clarity, but often it is simply exhaustion reaching its limit. The danger is that markets are very good at creating this exact condition right before patience is rewarded. Not because the market is cruel, but because opportunity only exists where endurance is rare. Understanding this changes how you see yourself. It reframes the internal dialogue from "I must be wrong" to "I am tired." That distinction matters. One calls for abandoning your thinking. The other calls for rest, distance, and perspective. You don't fix exhaustion by making permanent decisions. You fix it by reducing emotional load. When you stop interpreting fatigue as failure, something stabilizes. You realize that the discomfort you're feeling is not evidence against your intelligence or your judgment. It is evidence that you have been engaged for a long time without resolution. That alone does not invalidate the position. It simply means the environment is doing what it always does, testing patience through boredom rather than fear. The quiet truth is that most people who succeed long-term are not the most confident. They are the ones who learn how to sit with uncertainty without turning it into self-doubt. They recognize exhaustion for what it is, a psychological state, not a market signal. And they respond not with urgency, but with calm. Now let's move gently into the second truth, because once you understand exhaustion, the next layer becomes clear. What you are living through is not a failure of analysis or intelligence. It is a psychological test. Markets rarely defeat people by proving them wrong in a dramatic way. More often, they wear people down until they remove themselves. This is a far quieter process, and because it is quiet, it is harder to recognize while it is happening. Human psychology is built to respond to clear outcomes. We handle wins and losses better than we handle waiting. Waiting keeps the mind suspended. It offers no conclusion, no feedback loop, no emotional closure. Over time, this suspended state becomes uncomfortable, and the mind looks for a way to resolve it. In markets, that resolution often comes in the form of exiting a position, not because new facts have emerged, but because the emotional tension has become too heavy to carry. This is where many investors misunderstand what is happening inside them. They believe they are making a rational decision based on logic, when in reality they are responding to nervous system overload. Constant uncertainty keeps the body in a low-level stress response. It's not panic, but it's not rest either. The mind remains alert, scanning for signals, updates, reassurance. Day after day, this drains focus and resilience. Eventually, the system seeks relief, and the simplest form of relief is to step away. Markets understand this dynamic because markets are built on it. Long periods of silence, slow progress, and mixed narratives are not accidental features. They are the environment in which patience becomes rare. When patience becomes rare, it becomes valuable. This is why so many people exit not at moments of maximum danger, but at moments of maximum emotional fatigue. They don't feel afraid. They feel numb. And numbness feels like clarity. What makes this test especially difficult is that it does not announce itself. There is no single moment where you are told, "This is the test." Instead, it unfolds gradually. You become a little less interested. You check prices a little less often, then suddenly too often. You feel less emotional about the asset, but more irritated by it. You begin to distance yourself mentally, telling yourself you no longer care, while still carrying the weight of the decision in the background. This is not indifference. It is the mind protecting itself from prolonged uncertainty. The key insight here is that markets do not need you to be wrong. They only need you to be tired. A tired mind is more likely to abandon a well-reasoned position than a fearful one. Fear still believes something matters. Exhaustion wants everything to stop mattering. When you see it this way, many past market outcomes make sense. The majority of people do not miss low NG-term opportunities because they lacked information. They missed them because they lacked emotional endurance. This does not mean endurance is easy or that everyone should force themselves to stay engaged at all costs. It means understanding the nature of the challenge so that you don't misinterpret your internal state as a signal from the market. Feeling drained does not automatically mean something is broken. It may simply mean the waiting has lasted longer than your emotional expectations. When you recognize this as a psychological test, you regain agency. You stop personalizing the discomfort. You stop turning temporary emotional states into permanent conclusions. You allow space between how you feel and what you decide. That space is where discipline lives. The quiet strength here is not stubbornness, it is self-awareness. It is knowing that impatience often disguises itself as insight, and relief often disguises itself as wisdom. The test is not about predicting the future, it is about managing yourself in the present, and those who pass it are rarely the loudest or the most certain. They are simply the ones who understand that markets test psychology long before they reward positioning. Let's slow this down and speak clearly about the third truth, because this is where most confusion lives. There is a fundamental difference between short-term retail psychology and long-term capital psychology, and it has nothing to do with intelligence or access to information. It has everything to do with time, emotion, and expectations. Most people are conditioned to wait for excitement before they feel safe. They want movement, headlines, validation, and reassurance that something is happening right now. When that stimulation disappears, confidence fades, even if nothing structurally has changed. Short-term thinking is emotionally reactive by nature. It looks to the price for constant feedback, as if price were a judge issuing daily verdicts on whether a decision was right or wrong. When price is quiet, the mind fills the silence with doubt. When narratives turn negative, that doubt deepens. This creates a cycle where confidence is outsourced to the market instead of grounded internally. Every tick, every opinion, every rumor becomes a signal that demands interpretation. Over time, this is exhausting because the market never offers consistent emotional reassurance. Long-term capital operates from a completely different place. It does not require excitement to act, and it does not require constant confirmation to stay positioned. In fact, it often becomes most comfortable when excitement disappears. Silence is not threatening to long-term thinking. It is useful. It creates room to build, to accumulate, to align with structure rather than sentiment. Where short-term psychology sees boredom as danger, long-term psychology sees it as opportunity. This is why the most uncomfortable environments for retail participants are often the most productive environments for disciplined capital. Negative sentiment, declining attention, and repetitive discouraging narratives create emotional exits. Those exits create space. And in markets, space is where positioning happens. Not loudly, not publicly, but gradually and deliberately. This process does not feel rewarding in real time. It feels dull, it feels lonely, it feels like nothing is happening. And that feeling is precisely what filters people out. There is a quiet story that plays out again and again. When enthusiasm is high, most people feel confident but poorly positioned. When enthusiasm is gone, the few who remain feel uncertain but well positioned. The market does not reward the feeling, it rewards the position. This is one of the hardest truths to accept because it runs directly against human instinct. We want to feel good first and be right later. Markets demand the opposite. They ask you to be steady first and feel good later. Another important distinction is how time is perceived. Short-term thinking experiences time as pressure. Every day that passes without resolution feels like a problem. Long-term thinking experiences time as an asset. Time allows systems to mature, narratives to exhaust themselves, and emotional excess to clear. When you shift from seeing time as something working against you to something working for you, the entire experience changes. Waiting becomes less personal. It becomes part of the process. This does not mean long-term participants never feel doubt. They do, but they don't treat doubt as an emergency. They don't demand that the market resolve their discomfort on their schedule. They understand that silence is not the absence of progress, but often the presence of preparation. Infrastructure does not announce itself. Alignment does not trend on timelines. Positioning happens quietly, long before the crowd feels safe again. When you see this contrast clearly, you stop measuring your experience against emotional highs and lows. You stop asking why you don't feel excited. Excitement is not the goal. Stability is. Clarity is. The ability to remain grounded while others grow restless is not weakness. It is alignment with how real capital moves. This is not about being early or late. It is about being prepared. Prepared to sit in environments that feel unrewarding. prepared to let confidence come from understanding rather than stimulation, prepared to accept that the most important work in markets happens when almost no one is paying attention. Now let's speak carefully about the fourth truth, because this is where many people lose perspective. Price is almost never the first thing to move. It is the last thing. Most investors are conditioned to believe that price leads reality, that movement on the chart signals progress, danger, or opportunity. In reality, price is a reflection, not a cause. It reacts to changes that have already been set in motion elsewhere, often long before they become visible to the public. Before price ever responds, systems shift. Infrastructure develops quietly. Legal frameworks settle into place through slow procedural steps that are not emotionally engaging. Liquidity pathways are tested, adjusted, and reinforced. Institutions position themselves gradually because size demands discretion. None of this shows up on a chart in a way that feels satisfying to a retail observer. It feels like nothing, and that feeling is misleading. Markets are complex systems, and complex systems do not move in straight lines. They prepare in silence and express in bursts. By the time price finally moves in a way that feels obvious and exciting, much of the opportunity has already passed to those who needed visible confirmation. This is why waiting for price to prove itself often means arriving after the most advantageous positioning window has closed. Confirmation feels safe, but safety is expensive. This disconnect creates a lot of unnecessary frustration. People assume that if price hasn't moved, nothing is happening. They interpret stillness as stagnation. In reality, stillness often means the system is absorbing information, aligning incentives, and removing friction. Think about how any large structure changes. It does not announce each internal adjustment. It reveals the result only when the structure is ready to carry weight. There is also a psychological element here that matters deeply. Watching price becomes a proxy for control. It gives the illusion that by monitoring it closely, you are staying informed. But constant observation does not speed up structural change. It only amplifies emotional response. The mind begins to associate lack of movement with lack of progress, and progress with visible price action. That association is learned, not true. When you understand that prices last, your relationship with time shifts. You stop expecting daily validation. You stop needing the market to reassure you on your schedule. You become less reactive to noise because you recognize that noise often exists precisely because structure is not yet visible. The loudest debates usually happen before resolution, not after. This is especially important in environments where regulatory alignment, financial integration, and system-level adoption are involved. These processes are slow by design. They require coordination, testing, and caution. They move at a pace that feels unbearable to emotionally driven participants and perfectly reasonable to long-term planners. Expecting them to reflect immediately in price is like expecting a building to look complete while the foundation is still being poured. Another quiet truth is that markets often suppress visible price movement during periods of positioning. Stability can be a feature, not a flaw. It allows large players to operate without drawing attention. Volatility attracts emotion. Stability discourages it. From the outside, stability feels like neglect. From the inside, it can be intentional. Once price does move, narratives change rapidly. The same environment that felt boring suddenly feels obvious. Confidence returns quickly, often too quickly. But that confidence is backward-looking. It arrives after the uncertainty has already done its work. Understanding that sequence helps you resist the urge to demand proof before understanding. When you internalize that price follows structure, not the other way around, you stop measuring progress by short-term movement. You start measuring it by alignment, patience, and your own ability to remain composed during periods where the market offers no applause. That composure is not passive. It is active restraint. Nothing about this requires blind faith. It requires realism about how large systems evolve. Progress is not loud. Preparation is not exciting. And price, when it finally speaks, is usually repeating a story that has already been written quietly over time. Let's sit with the fifth truth for a moment, because this one is uncomfortable precisely because it feels so reasonable when it happens. Selling during exhaustion feels like strategy, but most of the time it is not. It is emotional relief, and emotional relief can be deeply convincing, especially after long periods of carrying uncertainty. When the mind has been under continuous low-level stress, it will eventually seek resolution in any form available. In markets, that resolution often looks like a clean break, a decision that removes the weight from your attention. The danger is that relief and wisdom feel very similar in the moment. Exhaustion narrows perspective. It doesn't make people reckless, it makes them minimalistic. The question shifts from what is the long-term outcome to what will help me feel better right now. The shift happens quietly. There is no internal alarm. In fact, the decision can feel unusually calm. That calmness is often misinterpreted as clarity, when in reality, it is the nervous system finally stepping out of a prolonged state of tension. This is why so many exits happen without drama. There is no spike in fear, no emotional collapse, just a sense of being finished. Finished waiting, finished thinking, finished caring. And because the emotional charge is low, the mind assumes the decision must be rational. But rational decisions expand future options. Relief-based decisions close them. Markets do not punish fear as efficiently as they punish fatigue. Fear can still be engaged with. Fear still believes the outcome matters. Fatigue wants disengagement. It wants to stop the internal conversation altogether. When fatigue drives the decision, the future is traded for the present. Not consciously, but functionally. This does not mean that selling is always wrong, or that stepping away is a failure. The key is awareness. Are you responding to new information, or are you responding to depletion? Those two states can produce identical behavior with completely different long-term consequences. Without awareness, it is easy to confuse one for the other. Emotional relief feels productive because it restores a sense of control. The moment you exit, the chart stops mattering, the noise fades, the background stress lifts. This immediate reward reinforces the decision emotionally, even if it weakens your strategic position. The mind remembers the relief, not the cost. This is how patterns repeat across cycles. Understanding this dynamic allows you to pause before acting. It creates a space between impulse and execution. In that space, you can ask whether the urge to act is coming from insight or from overload. This question alone can prevent many irreversible decisions. Another layer to this is identity. Long holding periods tie positions to self-image. When exhaustion peaks, exiting can feel like reclaiming independence, like proving you are not trapped by a past decision. That feeling is powerful, but detaching from emotional identity does not require abandoning positioning. It requires reframing how much mental energy you allocate to it. The strongest investors are not those who never feel the urge for relief. They are the ones who recognize it without obeying it. They understand that discomfort does not always signal danger. Sometimes it signals proximity to resolve. Not because resolution is guaranteed, but because environments that produce exhaustion tend to precede change. Selling to end discomfort may solve a short-term emotional problem, but it often creates a long-term strategic one. Patience, in this sense, is not passive endurance. It is active refusal to let temporary internal states dictate permanent external outcomes. When you see exhaustion for what it is, you regain the ability to choose. And choice, not relief, is where real control lives. Let's bring this to the final truth and speak about it slowly because it ties everything together. Wealth is built in silence, not in noise. This runs against almost every instinct people have, especially in an age where attention, urgency, and constant updates are treated as signals of importance. We are conditioned to believe that if something matters, it should be loud. If an opportunity is real, it should announce itself clearly. If progress is happening, we should feel it. But markets do not work that way. They move value long before they move attention. The loudest periods in markets are usually not creation periods. They are reaction periods. Noise appears when emotion is high, when narratives are competing, when certainty is being sold. Silence appears when positioning is happening quietly and without the need for approval. This is why the most uncomfortable phases often precede the most meaningful outcomes. They feel empty because they are not designed to entertain. They are designed to filter. When everything is loud, participation is easy. When everything is quiet, participation requires intention. That intention is what separates patience from passivity. Quiet periods force you to rely on your understanding rather than on external reassurance. They remove the emotional scaffolding that many people depend on. And without that scaffolding, only those who are comfortable with their own thinking remain engaged. This is where wealth transfer occurs, not as a dramatic event, but as a gradual reallocation. Those who need stimulation exit. Those who can tolerate stillness remain positioned. Over time, value shifts hands, not because one group is smarter, but because one group can endure an environment that offers no emotional reward. Markets do not reward attention, they reward alignment. Silence also protects developing structures. When something is being integrated into a system, discretion matters. Visibility attracts speculation. Speculation attracts volatility. Volatility attracts emotion. Emotion destabilizes processes that require precision and trust. So the most important changes often happen when few people are watching. By the time the noise returns, the foundation has already been laid. For the individual investor, this means learning to separate internal calm from external excitement. If your confidence depends on constant validation, silence will feel threatening. If your confidence comes from understanding, silence becomes manageable. It does not feel good, but it feels tolerable, and tolerable is often enough. Another subtle truth is that silence creates narrative confusion. When there is no clear story, people argue. They speculate. They fill the gaps with fear or frustration. This creates the impression that nothing is solid. In reality, it often means that the story is still being written. Markets reward those who can sit with unfinished narratives without rushing to conclusions. This does not require blind belief. It requires respect for process. Complex systems do not transform overnight, and they do not broadcast each step. Expecting them to do so is a misunderstanding of how structural change occurs. Progress is cumulative. It builds layer by layer, invisible until it reaches a tipping point. When you internalize that wealth is built quietly, you stop chasing moments. You stop measuring your progress by how stimulated you feel. You stop needing the market to entertain you. Instead, you focus on maintaining composure, preserving optionality, and staying aligned with long-term structure. The quiet confidence that comes from this understanding is not excitement. It is steadiness. It is the ability to remain present without demanding immediate reward. It is the knowledge that silence is not emptiness but incubation. And when you reach that place mentally, the market loses much of its power over your emotions. You are no longer waiting to be convinced. You are simply positioned, calm, and aware that what matters most often unfolds when almost no one is paying attention.